Hey, everybody, welcome back to the table. I'm Rick Morton and have the opportunity today to be joined by two of my panelist co hosts, Chelsea Sobolik and Emily Richards. Welcome, ladies. How are you today?
Doing great. Excited to be a part of the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hey, Chelsea, how are you?
I'm good. I've got coffee. We're doing great.
Wow, you also have Lionel, so he
I
may
do.
make a
Kidding.
cameo at some point, and so we want folks to know if a cat happens to walk through, he belongs and is a dear part of the
Yes.
Sobolik family. So I've missed seeing
Yes.
Lionel, so it was fun to see him. Maybe we'll get a chance for him to enter into the conversation. But y'all, we're continuing just to talk about issues and things and articles and things that are coming across our notice. And today we're going to at least start the conversation around the topic of reunification. And I think, um, speaking as one of those old heads in the Christian adoption and orphan care movement, this is something that we came to later. I think even in a conversation about the implications of reunification. I remember here at Lifeline in particular that we were much more deeply wound up in foster care here in particular, long before the conversation really emerged. And it was Tracy Newell, that both of you know, that on our team,
Mm-hmm.
who is one of our dear friends and somebody who's a dear part of us, that just really began to ask the question and pose the troubling question about, how do we think about foster care, and how do we think about that and not think about the reconciliation of families and the gospel implications of that. And so that's kind of where we're going to go today, and with that stated goal of reunification and foster care, but talking about some of the difficulty of that. And so we will start with a conversation. How about let's just jump in and we'll talk about um, an article that I know the three of us have looked at, actually comes from the Today Show
Mm-hmm.
and from today.com, regarding, um, you know, reunification and the attachment that kids form to caregivers who are not their primary caregiver, and maybe the lack of attention that we've paid to that. Um, I think that article, it really kind of hit deeply at the heart for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Chelsea, what about you?
Yeah, I read this and I thought, I think I've said this in every episode we've recorded so far of just how complex and nuanced all of these topics are. And this article, I think, gets to that. So I'm sure they'll link it in the show notes,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
it's about I think she was 6 when she entered foster care, and was later reunified with her birth family, but um, still fondly remembers and talks about her time with her foster care mom and what a formative experience that was. And for people listening who here's Lionel. um, he was also adopted as a stray kitty, so he might have some things to say. But no, I think this just continues to highlight that even when reunification is achievable, there is still trauma that happened at a separation or removal. Um, Attachments are formed with foster families, and then when reunification is the goal, or is achievable, that's not always neat and tidy, for all parties involved, because other attachments were created and were formed. So I think, we talked about in child welfare reunification being, um, you know, a good goal. I think it's important to remember, and this article broke my heart of just the complexities involved, but um, how messy so much in child welfare is.
Yeah.
And in the brokenness, we see God working, and we see the gospel, and we see um hope and redemption, but that doesn't diminish that a lot of these conversations are complex, and that gets to the complexities here.
Emily, what are you thinking?
Oh man. Well, likewise, had the opportunity to read the article, and um, I think it's haunted me in a like maybe a helpful way, if that's possible. And just these stories, like Chelsea said, and we talk often about all of these stories when we engage in caring for children in vulnerable situations begin in a season and situation that's broken and not as it should be. And I think we, I mean, generally we like to jump to the happy ending, and we
Hmm.
don't, as humans, we don't like to sit in the tension of what is not as it should be. But I think we have a responsibility, particularly as advocates, to really be there in that situation, that moment, recognize that all of these stories, even those that have this story that has a outcome in which she was able to reconnect with the foster family that gave her sort of some normalcy in the midst of a very uprooted childhood. That positive outcome starts with so much sadness and brokenness and trauma, Chelsea, as you recognized. I also think this moment in time that we're in, child welfare advocates and those that are in this space, we hear a lot and we talk a lot about ACEs and adverse childhood experiences, and the ways
Hmm.
in which, I mean, the studies obviously are very robust and out there, and we know the outcomes on our health and mental health as we grow up. For those of us that have those experiences in our childhood, there's also emerging research around PACEs, which I think is really, really encouraging in this moment in time. And that's the positive and compensatory experiences in
Hmm.
childhood. And so, sort of the anecdote and some of
Mm.
what I've been really encouraged in that early research is the power
Hmm.
of the one positive interaction experience. And I do think this story really beautifully highlights the power of not only the one positive interaction, but one photo and the link to protect that artifact for this little girl, and how it really became an anchor in a very unsettling. And I think we can all apply that regardless
Mhm.
of maybe our own unique stories, like that one letter you received in the wake of a loss of a loved one, that one and I think that's a call for all of us, and hopefully those of you guys that are tuning in, like, you don't know when you're going to be that one for someone.
Hmm.
And so I think that this kind of hit both for me, like really haunting in a like, oh my gosh, the brokenness, it's like almost paralyzing, and also haunting in like, oh my gosh, I could be that one for somebody
Mhm.
today,
Hmm.
or that one interaction with my child today could be what they hold on to in a season, a stormy season. So I think that can be a catalyst to encourage all of us to keep on in this good work.
I think, Emily, I like that really resonates with me. And I think that part of this as well is acknowledging that a lot of I'll build off of that and just say with a lot of the resiliency
Mhm.
conversation that's going on in child welfare circles and particularly in Christian child welfare circles. I think that's really, has that we've really elevated the conversation about what are those things that we can look at from a research perspective and that help to form a resilient basis for a child.
Mhm.
And one of the factors that is continuing to bubble to the surface is something that I think shouldn't surprise us at all, because it's actually been a part of research just in faith formation forever, and it's it's how many ones,
Mhm.
right? Like if there's a series of people that or if there's a collection of people that are investing in us in ways that are positive. And it just kind of led me to sort of pose the question, are we talking enough in Christian circles about the 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 long term effect of those connections? I think we sort of at times, I think, see a foster family's role to be done when they've when a child has left their home.
Mhm.
But we all know so many beautiful stories of where families have maintained a connection, and they've actually leaned in and formed a connection with the child's family of origin, and have fostered that connection more deeply. They've become, they've sort of become a wraparound to the family, not just a safe way station for the child. And the incredible positive effect that has on the entire family system. I'm just going to kind of throw out to both of you. I'm I'm sort of baffled as to why we're not talking about that more in Christian circles, and about why we're not talking about that in policy circles either. That this idea that creating positive community around families is what the church does, and it ought to be a layup for us that
Mm.
we think of that, but yet we really haven't fundamentally brought that thinking to foster care.
Mm.
um how one, how does that strike you, and two, do you have thoughts about what as a church we might begin to do?
I can maybe start and then kick it over to Emily, but it's interesting, we're recording this in spring 2026, and over the past couple years, but really concentrated probably the past 18 months, there's been so many public conversations on loneliness, on tech
Yeah.
and AI, and on kind of a broad scale, um, all of these conversations. And in some of the Christian podcasts and books I'm reading, I've noticed a through line that maybe hasn't been emphasized as much on human flourishing, really using that language of what are the things in life that cause humans to flourish. And
Yes.
so I feel like we're both having, as a society, having this conversation on how to think about AI. This is not a podcast about AI, but how to think about AI well. I've got
But
thoughts,
that's what
but
we do here, right? We're just talking. So,
we're
like,
just
throw it
yeah.
out there.
I am not
But
agreed to have that conversation.
Yeah, that's right.
but as I think as we're having a kind of a broad conversation about we are incredibly lonely and this device is not going to give
Mm.
me that human connection. I think we're wrestling with a lot of these things as a society, and this is a long way of saying, Dr. Rick, I think you're absolutely right that these broader conversations should sink down to the church level and the family flourishing level. And I love the language of human flourishing and families flourishing, and what does that look like for communities to flourish, and um, relationships are such a key part of that. And it's people are lonely beyond
Yeah.
families that are struggling, and I think that's something pastors and churches need to think about. Before our son joined us through international adoption, I served in DC as a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate for children and youth in foster care. And I share this to say, I think when people think about adoption and foster care, they either think, well, that's too big of a problem, I can't do anything, or I'm not called to adopt or foster right now or ever. And so what's my role and responsibility in this? And um, you I think one way is getting to know families in your community, and whether that's through kind of a formalized program like Safe Families for Children or CASA, um, or an informal way through your church. We can all get to know people in our community, and it really, um, like you said, Emily, that one touch point, or touch point a couple times a month really can go a long way.
I'm gonna throw out a thought. I just want to kind of this is a term we use a lot around here, and it's the term relational poverty.
Mm.
That that a lot of what the conversation in foster care is around is about tangible poverty, and it's what people have or what they don't have. But the observation is that a lot of a lot of what brings kids into a place that their family is at risk enough that they enter the foster care system is it's relational poverty. It's the lack of, lack of positive community. And like I said, I mean, it continues to be ironic to me, not in a good way, but just ironic that we're called out to be relational, to lean into that relational part of us and to show that relational aspect of God's character in what we do as the body of Christ. But we seem to struggle to bring that. Other thing, Chelsea, that you just when you said that, I'll throw out another name for folks, and that's the Upstream Collective. And so, collective Christian ministries that are basically coming together around the idea of hosting kids before they get into the foster care system. And so that's a freebie out there that if you're looking for a way to connect your church to be engaged in something like this, that's a good thing. Emily, you look like you had something to say, but I'm sorry I butted in.
No, no, I love that. And I think just I'll kind of jump on Chelsea what you were sharing. I think part of the struggle might be Rick, you posed the question like why are we not having enough conversation around maybe reunification or how do we engage in that in a meaningful way? And I do think if we look at the history of just the church's engagement in social justice issues, we'll just say broadly, one of the areas of critique, if I could offer it ever so gently, would be that we enter that space wanting to be the savior, and therefore we play a certain role, and then other parties fall into other roles, and that I think we need to continue to take a deep and hard look at and posture ourselves in a position of humility to be able to lean into the conversation and the place of human flourishing and the relational connectedness, addressing the relational poverty. Like we're all operating out of a deficit to a certain degree in this day and age. Chelsea, to your point of, the device that's ever isolating us from one another, from our own family members in our community. But to really to lean into the conversation of like, gosh, we're all humans trying to survive. And I think I was so struck by that through line in all of the different articles, Rick, that you sent ahead of this conversation. Like all parents generally want what's best for their children, like regardless of the starting point of the story. Like we all desperately want what is best for our children. How do we lean in as people in the faith community into hard stories, bringing our own broken places into that and say, okay, let's look at reunification as like, how do we come alongside you upstream and provide little, I said it in an episode earlier, like microdosing hope. Like, where are the little places that it's like grandma who's caring for grandson to keep so that we don't enter the foster care well, I guess technically formally in the foster care system through kinship care, but like how can we step in and go, hey, let me babysit for the day, and if that means you're formally it's respite care or how that looks, to meet all regulatory guidelines through whatever system, like how do we just be community alongside one another and just carry those burdens like even ever so gently. So I think kind of hand in hand sometimes with wanting to be the savior, it's also this like really robust, noticeable response that
Mhm.
I think walking back and just being faithful in the little things. I remember a friend sharing a couple years ago, and he's like very well accomplished, successful, someone you would look up to in the advocacy space of like, oh, they're really, doing big things, they're moving big policy, they're, wow, that's incredible. How can I be more like that? And I was really struck by a response to a question that he gave, which was like, if you want to make a difference, figure out the places that God's like uniquely gifted you and called you and you're passionate about and like lean into that at the most localized level. Like you care about
Right.
education, volunteer on the school board at your children's school. Like that is where we will like that groundswell will see change in the church being the church. So I think we've got to walk ourselves back from like, well, we're the saviors and it's this huge response that looks like this. Um, if I can offer that in all humility of the places I need to do that in my own life.
Well, and I think it's just finding ways to be present with other people, right? Like, and that's, I mean, fundamentally, that goes back to the struggle that both of you are talking about. When we all we we can all hold these up and say, like, these are the things in our lives that make it difficult, that we become increasingly isolated. Um, as a result of the fact that we don't have to go anywhere to do anything anymore. Um, and so therefore we don't, and our communities are suffering for that.
Mhm.
And we can't look at an issue like foster care and disconnect it from the fact that increasingly, as we become disconnected from our communities, these crises get worse.
Yeah. And if
And
we're
I go
not
back.
I
No,
if
go
we're
ahead.
not if we're not careful, and I mean, this is, I mean, I'm speaking like to my own, holding the mirror up, like, if we're not careful, we enter these spaces hoping to bring some hope, restoration, reconnection for children in our community that have experienced, loss of primary connection. And then they end up seeing this on the other side,
Right.
like, in fact, I was with Dr. Cross from the Care and Purpose Institute of Child Development this past year at an event, and he was talking a lot about we haven't even cracked the
Mm,
code, as child development specialists and experts on what this is gonna mean for early childhood
mm,
development, because eye contact is so important.
mhm,
Presence, like, practicing presence with
Mhm.
one another is so important. So, if we're not careful, we can enter the space hoping to bring reconciliation, restoration, and actually, like, you have to be so committed and
mhm,
so much self
Right.
control to be like actively present in those spaces.
mhm.
I think about, and this may come from left field, but I remember way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was in seminary. One of the things I encountered in New Orleans was the Baptist Friendship House, and came alongside this ministry, and I didn't really understand it, and then got sort of deeply wound up in understanding the history of what that was all about. And there was a time in American history where Christians moved into communities intentionally for the sake of building relationship. And that turned into, in some cases, like community centers and activity centers in communities. But the idea was not that you go plant a community center in a community. It was that believers planted themselves in a community and
Hmm.
went, and so they were evangelizing, they were telling people about Jesus, but it wasn't all that. It was just the fact that they were in a place doing life, and that, you know Chelsea, back to your point, that sense of flourishing, that they trusted the fact that gospel transformation is happening in the lives of the people that have planted themselves in this community. So therefore we believe that gospel hope's going to come to a community, because people that love Jesus are there and present in ways that they haven't been. And I just, like, I really want to see that.
Hmm.
I really want to see that
Mhm,
conversation stoked into flame in in all that we do for, vulnerable children in our community. And I'm just, yeah, I think we're missing the mark. And this is just
Hmm.
one of those places, just confessionally,
mhm,
where I think we're doing a lot of good, and the church is, you know, but that's one of the places where I think we're missing.
Hmm.
mhm. One of the things, and we've all heard it said, people are not projects, but I think often maybe in child welfare we can get to that reunification, or we can get to the end goal of an adoption placement or whatever the end goal looks like, where a case is closed, or a box is checked, and think, okay, we can move on to the next case, the next you know person. And I think I've thought a lot about, and this is one of the reasons I'm so grateful for Show Hope's work and, Lifeline's work as well, but about training, you know, adoptive families to handle, or to navigate trauma post adoption placement. And Dr. Rick, I think part of maybe what you're getting at too is, helping resource and equip families post reunification for so
Yeah.
that there's never a touch again with the
Right.
foster care system. And um, I've thought a lot about this in different scenarios, but how short term I can be, and I just want to pass a policy solution and or get to this quick end goal. But I mean, so much of this work is operating as a Christian in a broken world and working to address, you know, things in our communities. I mean, living in that tension of the already and the not yet, and knowing that, to steal the phrase from Eugene Peterson, it's a long obedience in the same direction. And,
That's right.
when I'm tired or when my plate looks fuller, maybe I need to slow down a little bit, but I'm still walking towards that end goal of the desire to serve children and families in whatever capacity that God has called me. And I think having the long term view in mind is really helpful for me, because then I can, you know, again, life is very full personally right now, and so involvement in community looks different than it used to. But God's placed a 5-year-old little boy in our house, and that's he's my primary care and responsibility right now. But so all that to say, I think it's been really helpful for me to remember the long term goals and visions, and constantly remembering that tension of, God's kingdom has come and it has not come fully yet. And that means that, um, as Christians, we both have the hope of the good news of the gospel and of revelation to bring, but we see and feel the impacts of the brokenness all day,
Mm,
every day.
mm. Yeah.
Well, I think go ahead, Emily.
I was gonna say just I think, Chelsea, I'll just add kinda in that now and not yet. We're in an interesting moment in time, like in church history, I guess maybe the American expression of the church right now, in that there's a lot of disillusionment and rethinking through like the like enterprise church and like the
Mm.
Yeah.
localized expression of the church. And so I think as we work our way through this, of course, like obviously a space for the institution of the church, no doubt. And also like as we receive communion on Sunday and then are sent out into our communities to be the body and the bread in through the week, like how can you be that in the space in which God's called you? So yes, how does the church, like, as an institution, respond, Rick? And I think that's the question you're asking to some degree. And then also, how do we as members of the body take the church into our communities every
That's
from
right.
Monday through Saturday? And so like I have been so surprised. My husband, well, he owns a recreational gymnastics facility here in Nashville, and we are getting so many questions right now from
Hmm.
parents of like, what, how help me, what
Hmm.
resources are out there for me? Like, so what is our responsibility in that space to elevate resources that are helpful, that we trust? We can't be all things, but can we just pump a little bit into this little space?
Mhm.
And so if you're a business owner and you're listening, if you're a teacher and you're listening, if you're a student, like, and I think it can be as simple as starting like Lifeline. You guys have incredible resources. We have some resources at Show Hope through our Hope for the Journey training. Like, help educate yourself. Um, what does trauma competency mean? What are some of
Right.
the spaces that these adverse childhood experiences impact our biology and our belief systems, behavior, all these things that those of us
That's right.
on this call and when you're in this space maybe understand to a deeper level. Like, let's begin educating ourselves a little bit on this and then bring it into our own unique space and be the church in our community, in our workplace through the week. And you know what I mean? Like, does that resonate?
Oh yeah. I think, and it's like, again, I just boil all of this, a lot of it down just to the ministry of presence, right?
Mm,
Like, it's and the question is, I mean, I think I was struck a few years ago, and I may have mentioned this the on an earlier episode, but being in a place where, um, I found myself in a room full of, child welfare secretaries. So,
mm,
like, all these people that are, that are, at the policy level guiding states into child welfare. And they were asking the question, how do we connect with the church? And, we at the end of the day, like, we share a compelling interest in that, right? Like, the state has a responsibility, civil authority, to see that kids are taken care of. We have a call by God to be there. But sometimes, as the church, we've got to realize we can't think like the state, and we don't and the state's goals are not our goals.
mm,
Right? Like, the state's compelling interest ends when a child goes home and their home is safe. And the state, there's no reason for the state to be engaged with that family any longer. Chelsea, you said it. We're in this to play the long game. And so part of playing the long game is we have a compelling interest to be involved in the life of that family long after the state does.
Mhm.
Because we're the custodians of the gospel. We're the,
mm,
like, and what we should want for them is, we should want for them community, just like we want community for ourselves.
mm.
This has been a really interesting discussion, I think, because I think there really are some implications in this, where a lot of this is not about it's not about the ministries we put together. It's not about the
Right.
plans we make. It's not even about the opportunities that are created by the state. The bigger question in all this is, who are we going to be?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's the bigger question. It's the harder question.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because those other things we can, like, there's a trite answer to, um, the question of who are we going to be, and how are we going to actualize presence into the lives of, families that have, sometimes not had the opportunity to know in the least what it looks like to follow Jesus, or what it looks like to have a healthy family life, or whatever. And they're not going to learn that through a program,
Right.
And
with all due respect.
how are we gonna be in order to ready our own souls to meet our maker? Not because we'll put it on Instagram and get followers,
Mhm.
or will be
Right.
the new innovative approach, or will be like, it's a very quiet service.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's hard. That's hard work. Um, but that's where I have hope that the church in the everyday, us in the communities, will be able to bring the hope
I
of the
think back to
gospel.
an old story
Mhm.
and this was a foster family that we helped, you know, get licensed and help them to do foster care here in Alabama, and heard the testimony of the mom in that family. And their story was that they brought a little boy into their home, and they really kind of did it thinking that it was a pathway to adoption.
Hmm,
And this little boy had come from a family, single dad, who was having to work, and he didn't have caregiving options. And so
Mhm.
he was essentially putting his little boy to bed and then going to work. And the people in their apartment complex began to hear the little boy by himself. And, you guys know what the story is, right? Like, they went and picked him up. And so the family did everything that they were supposed to do, and facilitating visitation and all that sort of stuff, but really had a bit of a resentful attitude toward the dad and his neglect, and, those sorts of things. And so they went to court, and the judge restored custody to
Mm.
the dad.
Mhm.
And the mom, in her testimony, she said, I was so angry. She said, I was just livid that the judge would do that. And she said, I had to go and like we were having to think about getting all of this stuff together and like how we were going to get this back to the dad. And she said, the thought came into my mind, I bet he doesn't even have a car seat.
Mm.
And she said, I went charging over across the courtroom. And she said, basically, my heart was I was going to go across and I was going to expose how wrong this judge was
Mm.
by outing the fact that he was so unprepared that he didn't even have a car seat. And she said, on the way over, the Holy Spirit just dealt with me hard.
Mm.
And she said, it sounded something like in my head, but you have a car seat.
Hmm. Ooh.
And yeah. And the story is, and and that's kind of the good stuff though. So the story ends and it's, one of those we would like to tell from the stage and all that. But she went over and she said, I bet you don't have a car seat, but I do.
Mm.
And it opened up a conversation where, he also confessed that he didn't have childcare.
Mm.
Mm.
And she said, well, I can take care of it.
Mm.
And instead of the walking out the story that she thought was being written, which was that little boy to come and be, another part of their family, he and his dad actually became part of their family
Mm.
because the end
Mm.
result of it was that they started building a relationship with his dad. They met the care need that ended up in getting to know him and actually building a relationship with him. And months down the road, um, a an opportunity for that dad to be sitting at their kitchen table and for her husband to lead him to Jesus.
Mm.
Wow. Wow.
And, and like, again, like this is the kind of story you tell from the stage and you go, you want to get the troops all rallied, but there's one of our social workers here that still has the picture in her cube of that little boy on his
Mm.
birthday. And it was him and his dad and that family and all their kids together at the birthday party because they're just kind of now doing life together.
Mm.
He came to Christ. They engaged him in their church. They did things to bring stabilization and he's just become a part of their world. And I think, um, man, I think that's a goal.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I'm just not sure we're pursuing it,
Yeah. And that goes
systemically
the
anyway.
beginning of the conversation of the humility, right? Like that
Mhm.
foster moms like put posturing of her heart to be willing to listen to the Holy Spirit and be obedient in the same direction for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Chelsea, to your
Mhm.
which is going, I mean, we follow the way of a crucified and risen Savior, right? So we can imagine that that long, long journey will certainly
Mhm.
bear its hard places and scars, and to
Mhm.
continue to ask for the Spirit, for the strength to be faithful in that direction.
We didn't answer a whole bunch today.
That was the
But
point of the
also,
podcast, though. I'm
like,
just kidding. Just kidding.
also that sweet dad, he like, the reframing of how hard he's
Mhm.
working to care, that
Yeah.
Mhm.
that becomes the story of
Mhm.
neglect, right? Like, which
Yeah.
obviously children can't at that age be at home by themselves, but also, like, can we have a creative imagination to engage the conversation and see this dad is, like, working so hard to
Mhm.
he's trying, you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
that was another article you circulated, Rick, of, like, my mom wasn't a bad parent, she was sick, and, like, our
Yeah.
systems, unfortunately, when states and systems are trying to address, like, issues of human connection, we can miss, like,
Mhm.
some of those deep underlying issues, and we're treating for the, effects and not, like, the root issue. So, I think that's also a lesson in and of itself,
Mhm.
for us that engage in this daily of continuing to engage our imagination and say, "Okay, let's not make assumptions right off the bat in this conversation, but
Yeah.
how can we see everybody through a lens of human flourishing? And also, like, obviously, there's realities at play too in these conversations that we have to look at. But I don't know. That was thanks for sharing that because that's really got my head spinning in a good,
Yeah.
really good way.
And y'all, that's what I hope this podcast actually does,
Mhm.
Mm,
honestly, is that, like, I hope that we get our heads spinning and that we're able to knock around some ideas here that are not necessarily conventional. And some of them probably aren't even going to be very good, but they're opportunities to be able to stir us to try
mm,
things and action and movement and that's kind of what we want, and that's what we want from the folks that are listening to this as well.
mm,
I think as you're listening and as we're attempting to build a bit of a community here, we want to hear from you. So what are you doing? What's your church doing? What are you thinking? What did we not say today that we should have, or what did we not take on that we could have? Or what's some practical solution that you has been, you know, floating around in your head, or maybe something you're doing or somebody around you's doing that would be helpful. And we want to hear that because really all we want is for you to pull up a chair and join us at the table, and that's what we're doing here as we sit around this virtual table and talk a little bit about child welfare. And so, Emily, Chelsea, thanks for today. Appreciate you very much and the conversation, and we appreciate all of you. And so we will land the plane on this episode, but we promise we'll be right back here again for another episode of The Table.